In 1999, Mercedes returned to the 24 Hours of Le Mans with a new machine built for one purpose: to be fast. The car was called the CLR, a closed cockpit prototype developed specifically for high-speed endurance racing. And at Le Mans, speed was everything. The circuit combined long straights with fast corners, so Mercedes needed a car that could reach extremely high speeds without giving away too much performance to aerodynamic drag. But there was a problem with that approach. A race car still needs aerodynamic downforce. As air flows around the bodywork, the car is designed to create aerodynamic forces that push it toward the track. That increases the load on the tyres and allows the car to carry more speed through corners. The challenge was finding the right balance. The CLR had to generate enough downforce to remain stable and competitive through the corners, while keeping aerodynamic drag low enough to remain extremely fast on the long straights. Mercedes had spent extensive time developing the prototype around this compromise, optimizing the car for the unique demands of Le Mans. On paper, the CLR appeared to have everything Mercedes needed. It was a sophisticated factory prototype, built by one of the biggest names in motorsport, and designed specifically for the fastest endurance race in the world. There was little reason to expect what happened next. During Thursday qualifying, the CLR was travelling at high speed when its aerodynamic behaviour suddenly changed. The front of the car began to rise, and within moments, the Mercedes CLR was no longer racing along the track. It was flying through the air. The first warning came during Thursday qualifying. Mark Webber was driving the CLR at high speed when the front of the car suddenly lifted. Within seconds, the Mercedes became airborne, crashed heavily, and came to rest, damaged. Remarkably, Webber survived the accident. For Mercedes, the incident was serious, but the car was not written off. The damaged CLR was repaired and the team prepared it to run again. By Saturday morning, Webber was back behind the wheel for the warm-up session. Then it happened again. At high speed, the front of the CLR lifted once more. This time the car was launched into the air and flipped over before landing upside down. Webber once again escaped the accident. Now Mercedes had seen the same extraordinary behaviour twice, with the same car, before the race had even started. But the CLR program continued. The remaining cars were entered into the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and one of them, the number 5 CLR, was driven by Peter Dumbreck. During the race, Dumbreck was approaching the high-speed section near Indianapolis when the CLR suddenly became unstable. The front of the car lifted, and the entire prototype left the track. The Mercedes cleared the barriers and flew into the trees beyond the circuit. It was one of the most spectacular accidents ever seen at Le Mans, and once again, the driver survived. Dumbreck escaped with relatively minor injuries despite the enormous impact. But this time, Mercedes could no longer continue. The remaining CLR was withdrawn from the race, bringing the program to an abrupt end. 3 separate airborne incidents had now occurred in the space of a few days. 2 involved Webber, and the third involved Dumbreck. Each time, a car designed to remain firmly planted at extreme speed had instead become airborne. The crashes were no longer just a series of spectacular accidents. They were evidence that something fundamental was happening to the CLR. The question was no longer whether the car could be fast. It was why the CLR could suddenly fly. After Webber's first accident, Mercedes had to determine why the CLR had suddenly become airborne. The team examined the car and began making changes to its aerodynamic configuration and setup. The objective was straightforward: make the car more stable at high speed and reduce the tendency of the front end to lift. Additional aerodynamic elements were fitted at the front of the car to increase front downforce. The idea was to keep more aerodynamic load over the front axle and keep the nose planted against the track. But this was not simply about adding as much downforce as possible. Mercedes still needed the CLR to remain competitive on the long straights of Le Mans. Any aerodynamic change had to work within the larger compromise between downforce, drag and high-speed performance. With the modifications made, Webber returned to the CLR for Saturday morning's warm-up, and the car became airborne again. The second incident was a critical warning. Mercedes had already changed the car after the first crash, yet the same basic behavior had returned. Whatever was causing the CLR to leave the ground had not been eliminated by the changes. Despite this, Mercedes continued with the remaining cars and entered them into the race. That decision would prove significant. Later that day, Peter Dumbreck took the wheel of the number 5 CLR. When his car became airborne near Indianapolis, it demonstrated that the problem was not limited to the particular car Webber had been driving. The CLR's behavior could become dangerous under the right conditions. After Dumbreck's crash, Mercedes finally withdrew the remaining CLR from the race. The response had failed to prevent the problem from returning. And that distinction was important. The crashes were not simply the result of damaged components, driver error, or one defective car. Something much more fundamental was happening. The CLR's aerodynamic system could become unstable at high speed. To understand why, we need to look at what happens when the airflow around a racing car changes, and how a car designed to generate downforce can suddenly produce enough lift to take flight. To understand how the CLR could become airborne, we first need to understand what a racing car is actually doing with the air around it. At high speed, airflow is not simply something the car has to push through. It becomes part of the car's performance. The bodywork and aerodynamic surfaces are shaped to control the airflow and create a pressure distribution that produces downforce. That downforce pushes the car toward the track. More load on the tires means more available grip, allowing the car to carry greater speed through corners. But the important point is that aerodynamic forces are not fixed. They change with the car's speed, ride height, and attitude. One of the most important parts of that attitude is pitch. Pitch describes the car rotating around its lateral axis, with the front and rear changing height relative to each other. A race car can pitch under braking, acceleration, over bumps, or when traveling over changes in track elevation. Normally, the aerodynamic package is designed to remain predictable as this happens. The problem comes when the car moves outside that stable aerodynamic condition. At very high speed, the CLR could approach a crest in the track and become temporarily unloaded as it passed over the change in elevation. The front of the car could begin to rise, and this is where the situation could become dangerous. As the nose rises, the aerodynamic relationship between the car and the airflow changes. Air can begin getting underneath the front of the car instead of flowing over and around it in the way the aerodynamic package was designed to handle. That changes the pressure distribution around the car. The aerodynamic force acting on the front can then begin moving in the wrong direction. Instead of helping keep the car planted, it starts contributing to lift. And once that happens, a dangerous feedback loop can develop. Front rises leads to more air underneath, leads to more lift, leads to front rises further, even more air underneath. A small change in pitch can therefore become much larger in a very short amount of time. The front becomes increasingly unloaded, the aerodynamic balance shifts, and the car can move rapidly from a stable condition toward an unstable one. Eventually, the aerodynamic lift can become strong enough to overcome the car's weight. At that point, the CLR is no longer simply losing grip, it is becoming an aircraft. There was another factor that could make the situation even more complicated: following another car. A race car traveling behind another prototype does not encounter clean, undisturbed airflow. The car ahead leaves a turbulent wake behind it, changing the speed and direction of the air reaching the following car. That can alter the aerodynamic balance of the car behind it. For a car that is already sensitive to pitch and ride height, this can make the aerodynamic behavior even less predictable. The airflow arriving at the car is no longer exactly what the aerodynamic package was designed to handle. And the CLR's design made aerodynamic stability especially important. At Le Mans, reducing drag was extremely valuable. The car needed to reach very high speeds on the long straights, so Mercedes had optimized the CLR around high-speed aerodynamic efficiency. But aerodynamic efficiency always involves compromises. A car can be extremely effective in one aerodynamic condition and still become unstable when its attitude changes. The same design choices that help reduce drag and maintain high-speed performance can also leave less margin for unexpected changes in pitch, ride height, or airflow. This is why describing the CLR's problem as simply not enough downforce would be misleading. The car did not necessarily need more downforce everywhere. The deeper problem was how the aerodynamic forces changed when the car's attitude changed. Adding more front downforce can improve the car's behavior in a particular condition. But if the aerodynamic characteristics change dramatically once the nose rises, simply adding more downforce does not guarantee that the car will remain stable. That distinction is critical in race car engineering. A car does not just need to generate a large amount of downforce. It needs to generate that downforce consistently across the range of conditions it can encounter. The CLR was designed to use airflow to keep itself on the ground, but under the wrong combination of speed, pitch, track geometry, and airflow, that aerodynamic system could become unstable. And once the front began to rise, the airflow itself could make the problem worse. The result was one of the most spectacular failures in the history of Le Mans. A race car designed to exploit the air at extreme speed, suddenly using that same air to leave the ground. After Peter Dumbreck's crash, Mercedes had little choice but to withdraw the remaining CLR from the 24 hours of Le Mans. The project was effectively over. The CLR never returned to competitive racing, and Mercedes' attempt to fight for overall victory at Le Mans ended after a series of spectacular airborne accidents. What had begun as an ambitious high-speed prototype had become one of the most memorable engineering failures in the history of the race. But the CLR was not simply a badly engineered car, it was a sophisticated prototype designed around the extreme aerodynamic demands of Le Mans. Its problem only appeared when a very specific combination of conditions came together: extreme speed, changes in pitch and ride height, track geometry, and the airflow around the car. Under normal conditions, the CLR's aerodynamics were supposed to keep the car firmly attached to the track. Under the wrong conditions, those same aerodynamic forces could work against it. That is what makes the CLR's story so important from an engineering perspective. A system does not have to fail constantly to be dangerous. It can perform exactly as intended throughout most of its operating range, yet become unstable when conditions move beyond that range. And in a racing car traveling at more than 300 km per hour, there may be almost no time to recover once that happens. The CLR demonstrated a fundamental principle of aerodynamic engineering. Performance is not only about how much downforce a car can generate, it's about how predictably that downforce behaves when conditions change. At Le Mans in 1999, the CLR pushed that principle far beyond its limits, and briefly became an airplane.